fatherless, bleed for the widow. Come now, and let us reason together. Though your sins be... Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Returning after a significant hiatus. And we're going to do, as you have doubtless noticed, the book of Isaiah. And I'd started on the book of Isaiah a couple of years back doing an audio study. And since I started doing this, the video format, I thought I've been thinking about picking Isaiah up again, but I've been reluctant. What's wrong with my microphone? It's just my ears. Okay. And I thought about it. I'm like, my computer's making a lot of weird noises this morning. It's like I'm discovering I need to take it into the shop. So anyways, I thought with the change in format, it probably wouldn't be good to pick up in the middle of a book. So we're going to start from the beginning. And it's one of my favorite prophets, actually. I could say that. I don't know if I really have a favorite prophet, or have favorite prophets. But when I was 19 and in college, and I first started to really seriously read my Bible and tried to pick it up to understand, I looked into the book of Isaiah. Man, that fan is really bugging me. It keeps going, yeah. Boy, hopefully I can put that out of my mind. Having a bit of the compulsion to fix problems when I see them. So, Melissa's gone steady on me. Anyways, I remember when I was in college and I was first taking the Bible seriously, and I started reading. I read the Living Bible, and it was the edition known as the Book. And in the introduction to different books of the Bible, they had little introductions, and I was reading them because I was trying to figure out where to start reading. And in the book of Isaiah, they said it was probably one of Jesus' favorite prophets, because he quoted so much. He quoted it so much, which is an assumption that I wouldn't make. But at the time, I thought, well, Jesus quoted a lot, one of his favorites. I'd like to understand. So I picked it up, and I read what you see in front of you. And especially verse 3, I just really didn't know what to make of this. The ox knows his owner, the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider it. And maybe you're saying to yourself, that's not a particularly difficult verse to understand. No, it's not. And I was, I was a student at the University of Illinois, which is a pretty selective university. And, I got in there on an ACT score that gave me a perfect score on the reading section, 36. So I know how to read. At least they tell me I know how to read. I know how to pass the reading test, at least. And I come across this verse and don't know what to make of it. And I use it as an example because it shows how, even if you have intellect, if you just don't understand the context of what you're reading, it's hard to make heads or tails of what exactly it signifies. Especially if you lack experience, if you're young. A lot of times things like animals, you don't really know a lot about animals. In fact, if you live in a city, you may never get to learn much about animals, at least outside of some sort of educational program. You're certainly not going to learn much about animals through keeping them, and certainly not about livestock-style animals as opposed to pets. But even the truth is you can infer the same thing from pets, and honestly, that's where being young comes into it, because a young person may not have experience with actually understanding how animals are raised. So, Isaiah 1. Isaiah the prophet, timeline-wise, took place, at the end of the 7th century going into the 6th century BC. At least according to the timelines that I was always familiar with. Though I understand that the timelines, I don't give specific dates in my studies because, one, I'm not that technical of a scholar. I'm not a technical scholar. It's not a scholarly study. That's another important thing for everyone to know. If you're expecting some sort of detailed scholarly study, you need to look elsewhere. What you're going to find is an expository study based on my Christian experience, my understanding of the Christian gospel. When I teach the Old Testament, I teach it in light of the New Testament. So it's going to be a Christian gospel understanding of the Old Testament, looking to understand from the prophets what lessons we can take. The specifics of the history of that time we may touch on from time to time, but it will not be the focus. The focus of the study is not to put the book of Isaiah entirely into its historical context. And some people say it's impossible to understand anything without understanding historical context. And that's true for some, to a certain degree. You need to understand historical context to understand what people are saying. But understanding the context is not the same as having just too many details about the context that distract you from understanding the core truth that you can glean from the experience. So Isaiah prophesies, between the end of the 7th century, which is the 600s, if you know what I mean, and the 500s, the 6th century. It goes the same in the BC. From 0 to 99 is the 1st century, or 0 to 100, 1st century. 2nd century is 101 to 200. And that's how it works with centuries. So, from 590, from, what is it, from 501 to 599 or whatever, from 501 to 600 is the 5th century, or 4th century, 5th century. Now I'm confused. Did I say 7th and... No, it should be the 6th century. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, brainy, real smart. Okay. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. And so there are a list of kings here. And for the most part, Uzziah. Now, I got this. You think, with all that time off, Paul, didn't you prepare? No, that's something I also don't do. I rely on what I've learned and to conduct the study. So that's another thing you may find annoying. Uzziah, he was a leper. He was a king. He was generally satisfactory, I believe. Yeah. He was... yeah, because he had the leper issue was part of a punishment from God, but in general he did what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, I believe, or it was a mixed bag. Is that what it was? We can look these things up instead of guessing at them. That's another option. Because we can seek Isaiah. Oh, a second. That's going to look weird. Okay. Through the Bible collection here. A little piece of software I picked up in the Menards bargain software bin about 20 years ago. Almost 20 years ago. I don't know. Something like that. Maybe more like 15. Maybe more like 18, actually. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, the nice thing about kings is you can just look up their name. Okay, this is actually Shalom, so that's going to mess things up. Oh, I realize I haven't brought it up yet for you. Here we go. So I've searched... Oh, great. There we go. So I did a search in Uzziah. Uzziah began to reign in the 2nd year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, who is the king of Israel, who's going to be carried into captivity. Chapter 32, verse 32. 2nd year of Uzziah. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. So, generally pleasing. Doesn't mean he was perfect, but he was, if you read it in verse 35, howbeit. Oh, wait. Oh, Jotham. I'm just reading Jotham instead of Uzziah. Jotham, the son of Uzziah. So we got to go back to Uzziah, the son of whoever he was son of. It's funny, they don't list it. We may have to look in Chronicles. Uzziah. He started off young. He was 16 years old. Amaziah, his father, yes. And he was 16. He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord once again. According to his father Amaziah, he sought God in the days of Zechariah. He went forth and warred against the Philistines. And he was also a leper. That comes down later. We're not going to go into the history of each king. Jotham, also not a bad king. Ahaz had some frustrating moments with the Lord. And Hezekiah also known mostly for his... there are very few kings who did not do things that displeased the Lord. But they are among the kings who, for the most part, were pleasing to the Lord. Except that I believe Ahaz, even though he received some of the most important promises that you'll find in the book of Isaiah. I want to look up Ahaz briefly. Or Ahaz. I bet it's more like Ahaz. King of Judah, father of Hezekiah. So, Ahaziah, that's a different guy. Different guy. I don't want Ahaziah. Jehoahaz. He's going to be more in the 20s because he's even later than the... King Ahaz. Ahaz slept with his father. Yeah, see, look at it. In the time of his distress, did he trespass yet more against the Lord? This is that King Ahaz. So Ahaz was the one, he was the one in the group who was particularly odious. Okay, just for a note. We will see it as we go through. So those are the reigns of the kings. Like I said, taking place, stretching from the time of the 7th century to the 6th century BC, meaning the 600s to the 500s. I have dates in my Bible will give dates of like if I look at my companion Bible, which is unfortunately was created by a scholar who lived in the 1800s, sorry. And so when he dates the book of Isaiah, he dates it between 649 and 588, and he'll date the carrying away into captivity at 611. But modern scholars date it later. So, I don't know the provenance of the dates, and it doesn't matter to me. I don't need to know the exact date something happened to be able to tell whether it was right or wrong. That's the premise. Okay, so those are the days in which this vision takes place of Isaiah. I should mention also at the outset, these kings, I'm about to record, I think this week or maybe even right after this study, I want to record a resource for beginners to talk to new Christians about how they might approach their Christianity. There's a question someone asked. And as I do that, I think about beginners as I start to study, because I got to be mindful of the fact that a lot of this stuff is going to be, you're thrown into the midst of some confusing things. And one of the things was I found I couldn't study Isaiah as I started. I needed someone to help me. So I began reading, certainly not on my own, I began reading the Gospel and also Samuel, which was actually a close, for a while I had been thinking I would start Samuel instead of Isaiah. But I just didn't feel like I wanted to do a historic book. Well, I wanted to do I didn't want to do a narrative book. I wanted to do a prophetic book. They're just a little more deep on doctrine. And Isaiah can be difficult. So, we have these, you gotta understand that, how do we have kings in the Bible? We start from the book of Genesis with Adam and Eve, and we get to the Noah's flood. The flood's over, then there's history kind of commences, and people spread out on the world, and we have Abraham and his family coming forth to receive the promise of God, and eventually giving birth to Isaac and Jacob, who was the father of the 12 tribes who became the nation of Israel, and out of whom came Christ. But in the process of becoming a nation and in the process of losing a nation, Israel had a lot of history, including the history of the kings and of the judges and of the others who ruled Israel both for and against God. And And so there are a great number of lessons to be learned from those historic events. And the prophets are there to guide us morally, primarily through the events that they experienced in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Because the prophets are primarily the prophets of the kingdoms. Now, why do you say kingdoms? Because at some point in their history, Israel had a civil war, and the kingdom became divided into a northern kingdom, which was known as Israel, and a southern kingdom, which was known as Judah, from which we get the term Jews. Because once the northern kingdom went into captivity, the entire kingdom was known by the southern kingdom's name, which was Judah, which was shortened to Jew, and so all Israel became Jews. And that's a short history on that. So, and also these prophets contain a great deal of prophecy and foretelling of what would come concerning the Messiah. Especially Isaiah has many prophetic chapters, many prophetic passages, which we will point out, of course, as we go along the way, especially in regards to Christ, our Savior, and the sacrifice and all that, and whatever greater understanding we can glean from that. So it says, "Hear, O Israel, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. The ox knows his master, the ox knows his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel does not know. My people doth not consider." And again, now as an adult, that analogy seems very easy. Well, okay, look I've taken care of Israel. I've nourished and brought them up. I blessed them. I gave them everything they wanted. I brought them into the promised land. They demanded a king. I gave them a king. Then the king was not pleasing, and the kingdom was divided, and the people suffered, and there was wars, as was predicted. Because the king would not serve, the people. He would serve himself, and the people would serve him. That's you want a king, you will serve him. He will take your sons for his armies. He will take your daughters for his concubines. Is that what you really want? Someone all powerful above you? You already have me above you. I'm God. And that was the offense at the time, because they had asked a king, and God said to Samuel, who was the judge and leader of Israel at the time, don't feel bad. They haven't rejected you because you're their leader. They've rejected me, for I was their king. It's saying, I've done all this to bless these people, and they don't know. Animals know. Oxes know. They know their owner. The ass knows his master's crib. He knows where the hay is and where it's warm at night. The ass knows where to go to get in out of the rain. He knows the barn stall where he gets fed. They know the sound of their master's voice when they hear him coming. I see it all. When my wife goes out, the chickens pay attention and the dogs look up because the food often comes from her. They know where their bread is buttered, so to speak. But not my people. That's what he's saying. They've rebelled against me. I've done everything I could for them to bless them. I blessed them according to all the promises that I promised them. But they violated the covenant I made with them. They gave offense in every word and deed. I mean, I'm being just a bit hyperbolic. But seriously, the nation seriously transgressed the covenant which God had made with them and failed to uphold their end of the bargain as far as the old covenant and the laws that God had given them through Moses. God blessed them, gave them the nation, gave them the land, brought them into it, gave them victories over their enemies. And they turned and rebelled against him. And there's a lot of reasons why people do rebellion. At times it's hard to understand, right? I mean, you ever done anything and then been caught and then had people ask you, why'd you do it? And you're like, I don't know. I don't know. Or maybe you say, I don't know, because you don't want to give the reason, because the reason makes you look too bad. I don't know. But certainly sometimes we don't know why we do what we do, And there could be a number of reasons. You look at the actions of people and you'll say, why do they do that? Why do they behave in such a way? It doesn't seem productive. When people take actions that are either self-destructive or destructive to those around them without obvious benefit. I mean, it's one thing if, like, I do something destructive to people around me and I benefit. Then you can understand, at least from a Machiavellian, the point of view of, like, when I say Machiavellian, I mean, like, that sort of cutthroat perspective of why they're acting. It's like, well, they're acting in their own self-interest. And damn everybody else. And there's plenty of that in the world. Sinful nation. A people laden with iniquity. And I forgot to mention at the beginning of this study, and I will try to remember this for all studies. The music you heard was from Isaiah 1. All the music you hear in the intros, because someone's like, where can I find this? Where this specific one? And they're all on oraclesofgod.org, my website. And if you go to oraclesofgod.org, and I believe you click on the songs link. Where is my... Oh, wrong page. There you see songs up there. If you click on that, it'll take you to the songs page, which has all the music. In fact, if there's not like there's that many songs, but there's Isaiah 1 right here on the right-hand side. Oops, you can't see it. I'll just squish it a bit. That'll help. Yeah, where we go. There I have all the songs I've done from Isaiah on the right hand. It's not finished, but hey, everything I have is pretty much here as far as scripture songs. I believe there's a few things that haven't been released here, but everything that can be had, it can be had here. Oh, great. Well, psychology. All right, here we go. Well, that's interesting. Wrong page, Paul. Why can't I find the right page? All right, whatever. There we go. All right. Yeah, you're not supposed to see that page. Good thing that's why they block your key. So no one can see. All right. So we have a sinful nation. A people laden with iniquity. Why did we go to that page? Whatever. Find it. Because that, yeah. People laden with iniquity. Just the music, mentioning the music, yes. A sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward. Why should you be stricken anymore? Why will you revolt more and more? The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. I'm going to hold on there. Well, let's read a bit more. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. And we're going to continue in a second, actually. So a sinful, what we're saying is the people is sinful. The nation is sinful. They are laden with iniquity. Meaning like burdened. They're carrying a lot of iniquity. It's not like they just got some sins. They have it piled up. And they're carrying it around with them all the time, so to speak. It's a burden. And they are a seed of evildoers. Children that are corrupters. And so it's accusing them of many things in a general sense. Seed of evildoers is when, your parents themselves are wicked. And then the children are corrupters. See, people sometimes think, because the Bible has said some certain things, like they'll say that children can be punished for the sins of their parents. And sometimes people say, well, their children are suffering because of the children of their parents. This came up in the New Testament when Jesus was healing a particular man. Was it the guy who was walking and leaping and praising? No, that was the book of Acts, I'm thinking. But anyways, at one point, I forgot what I'm thinking, was it withered hand? It doesn't matter. Jesus was healing someone. I don't want to delay the study by trying to be too specific, because I don't promise to be that specific. One time Jesus was healing somebody, and they asked him, sir, who sinned that he was born blind? I don't know how else. That must be what he had. That he was born blind, him or his parents. Who sinned? Someone must have sinned. This guy was born blind. He's sick. So there must be sin involved. That was the assumption by a lot of people because it was a common belief. It's not a scriptural teaching per se. Except you look here and you say like, well, this makes me think that. It sort of feels like blaming the kids for their parents' sin. It's obviously not blaming them technically, but it feels like the kind of sentiment that has to do with some sort of inherited sin. But that's not really the case. In the book of Ezekiel, I forgot the exact chapter, but in the teens or 20s, whatever. It's not hard to look up. And maybe I'll come up with some keywords, and if you're interested, you can look it up. In the book of Ezekiel, there's a place where, you can look up the phrase, children's teeth set on edge. It said, you will no longer have this saying where it says, the parents have eaten the sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. Meaning that I eat the sour grape, and the child is feeling the effect of the sour grape. I mean, like, their teeth are set on edge, I think refers to the sour reaction. So, I eat a sour grape, and my kids feel the results. And that's a metaphor, obviously in a hyperbole of a metaphor, for a child somehow having the effects of their parents' sin visited on them, either through some sort of punishment, like the man born blind, or through their own behavior, like sometimes like they've inherited. And sometimes children do inherit from their parents, and that is the thing. And that's what it says in the scripture. It says if a child has wicked parents and they follow in their parents' wicked ways, they will suffer the same things. Because there's another problem. The problem of humans deciding that sins are no longer sins because mom and dad did them. You know what I mean? When generations begin to not care. And the perfect example of this I can give right now is fornication. And the number of Christians who think fornication is just totally cool. You know, it's totally acceptable. And because they engage in it. Maybe they don't think it's acceptable, but they continue to engage in it. Why? Because it's become culturally acceptable. And that's like a fathers to sons kind of issue. Maybe your parents didn't approve, but the world approved. So there's a certain sort of like, you also remember in the Bible, sometimes when it talks about fathers and sons and children, it's talking about a generational distinction more than actual blood parentage, at least in a prophetic sense like here. I don't think that when it talks about children that are corrupters, it necessarily means like in an individual family. It's talking about of the society at large. So the parents became evildoers. They were corrupted in their own way. You know, they passed this on to their children. Now their children are not just corrupt, but they are corrupters. You know what I mean? Like when I was in college, I remember I smoked marijuana, and I remember I tried to get people to smoke it who didn't. You know, I was a corrupter. Someone who had never tried it, they were reluctant to try it. I worked with this guy, and I talked them into trying it. You know, that's what I was doing with my time. And so that's that's a corrupter, someone who corrupts others to sin. And when the children become corrupters, you know what I mean? They're promoting and furthering the sinful things of the nation, and it has a lot to do with their parents passing this down to them. So, but it's not that innocent children are punished for their parents' sins. It's that the parents' sins have an effect on the children, and when the children persist in that evil effect, they also suffer the same retribution for their sins. Just because mom and dad did it and I inherited it, and maybe I don't even know much better, because the argument would be from the New Testament that everyone does know better, and that there's a certain aspect of the conscience which informs us of the sinfulness of the sins we do, which makes us responsible for it, even when we think when we would otherwise say maybe we don't know better, but maybe that's a bit of BS. You know, maybe they do know better. Is the real, that's what's really going on. Maybe you do know better. Maybe you aren't as ignorant as you make out to be, right? So they have forsaken the Lord. And this is the thing. It's like, it's not surprising to me that when I was in high school, before I got serious about my faith at 19, when I was in college, it's no surprise to me that as I pursued the things of the world, as I pursued the hedonistic pleasures of life, drugs, sex, as I was pursuing those things, my childhood interest in God and my faith very much took a back seat. They never entirely went away, but certainly weren't my focus, and certainly weren't informing my behavior for the most part, except for if someone said something about evolution. This is why I'm not a big fan about like the whole, talking about or against evolution or anything like that, getting into those discussions. I don't like it because it's deceitfully. You can, like, if I would fight with someone over evolution, I could deceive myself and say I'm a good Christian while I'm fornicating. You know what I mean? Like, when it comes to fornication, any girl that would do it with me, I'd be glad. Not that I was, particularly Casanova or anything. Definitely not. But I wanted to be. And so, what I'm saying? I had no qualms about fornicating or using drugs and alcohol and a lot of other things. But I did about evolution. And for someone who believes in evolution or is of that sort of mindset, I'm going to come off as particularly hypocritical. I don't know that my testimony is going to be particularly persuasive, considering I don't believe in what I believe enough to change my own behavior. But I'll argue with people about things that I don't really understand. At the time, I didn't know what I was talking about with science and evolution, but I was arguing about it like I did, and I had no business. I mean, everyone has a right to argue about anything they like. But I'm just saying, I didn't have any solid ground to stand on as far as my own understanding of that subject. And it makes me, it's just like, it's like a lot of stuff in outrage culture. We can substitute that for our faith. Like, what the homosexuals are doing, it makes me so mad. Or the transgenders are doing stuff. I'm getting so, it's easy to make your whole walk about being angry about what people are doing that's not right. But it's another thing to take responsibility for your own life and your own actions primarily. I still teach that homosexuality is a sin. And, people who do, trans stuff is abomination. You should not do that to yourself. Like what you're doing to your body thing. The Bible doesn't, you're not supposed to put cuttings in your print. It's Old Testament, right? In the Old Testament. So, if you have tattoos, it's fine. I don't have any objection to tattoos. Well, I would never get them. I always tell my kids not to get them. I advise you not to get them. But if you have them, I don't think it's a sin. But in the Old Testament, it was forbidden, along with cutting yourself. And, of course, these things, this goes well beyond tattoos, as far as changing your body, as far as marking and mutilating your body. I don't believe in physical mutilation. I believe people should learn to be content with what they have. We are not all born the same. Truly, it is said. And we are not all, we're not born the same, and we don't grow up the same, and we don't live the same, and we're all different. Yet at the same time, in that, I want what I am to be what I accept. Not, I can't accept myself until I rip myself to pieces and reform myself. That's not accepting yourself. Accepting yourself is something that happens up here, not that happens out here. It doesn't happen out there. I had to do it. When I was young, I wasn't sure what I should be. Did I want to be what I would grow up in? Did I want to be me? You know what I mean? Not just a man or a woman, but a me. I have to accept the person I am and deal with it. Maybe not everyone want to accept who they are. They want to change who they are into something else, and then they can feel like they're truly me, meaning they hate themselves and they want to be someone else. That's why they commit suicide at such a terrible rate. And I have a lot of sympathy for all those people, honestly. But point is, just because society has decided everything goes, doesn't mean everything does go. I still teach the same things. I don't think it's good. What I'm saying, though, is like going and attacking people who have severe sin issues and things that are really kind of new to our experience. You know, when you're talking about like the things that can be done surgically to people, that obviously this is somewhat new compared to ancient times. So all that stuff, it's easy to just look at the outrage things going on in the world. Banning Dr. Seuss and all that stuff, getting all worked up about the cancel culture and stuff. I mean, though I'm worked up about cancel culture. I'm doing something about it. I'm writing a lot of songs you guys have not heard yet. There's many more songs written than have been published just yet. But this year is going to be a lot of publishing. As long as I can avoid getting canceled again. But all right, I'm kind of in the weeds, aren't I? But I had a point, and it's a good point as far as the sin and all that. It's fine. Yeah. Society thinks it's moved on, and that these things are now acceptable, but that doesn't change anything. But my point is, we can fight those things. Yeah, this one. We can fight those things. We can still be against those things. But we should not think ourselves superior just for recognizing the sins of others. Especially ones that are so, I want to use the word grotesque, but only because of the vividness. I'm not making a comment on what they do or anything like that, or them as person. They're not gross. I just mean like having my face changed into a duckbill or something. There's a grotesque sort of Isle of Dr. Moreau human experimentation kind of creepiness that goes on with this stuff. Even if they're able to create beauty out of it, there's something freaky, okay, inherent in it. And I know that adds for some people to the interest in it. But it's not good for the people who engage in it, and it's not good for society. And what I would say is, despite all that, like the main thing I look at is like the society can be corrupt, and it's easy to go after the easy things. But what about me? What do I have to correct in my life? How am I not pleasing to God? How am I, people, because, like I said, I used to, when I was in college, right out of high school, I had a book called The Collapse of Evolution, and it was filled with these little facts, and it was a very, almost like a Reader's Digest type of short, brief things to read, and very thin book, and a lot of the facts in it were just totally wrong. There was like misinformation. When I found that out eventually later, it really was eye-opening. And things I already stopped relying on it, so it wasn't like it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my little book is all full of garbage. It was, I knew about it long before I realized that. How inaccurate that book was. And so I go around, making myself feel good by arguing these points with people, by getting involved in that battle. And not that we shouldn't fight the battles over cultural issues, over moral issues. We should. But again, a lot of times when fighting the battle is just being outraged about it and telling other people about the very fact, did you hear what's being done? Did you hear what happened? Did you hear about this particular event, this person, that, what they said? It's a total distraction. It doesn't actually do anything. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel to anger. They are gone away backwards. And like I said, and the whole point of bringing that up, that evolution thing, was, remember, when I was in high school, I was like reading The Collapse of Evolution. I was a Christian. I remember I broke up with a girl because she believed in reincarnation. That's how Christian I was. And at the same time, I was not immoral. I wasn't following God's. I knew these things were wrong, but I just didn't think they mattered anymore somehow. or I don't know what I didn't think is the right word. Because it's not that I thought they mattered, or I didn't positively think they don't matter. What it was is I just didn't think about them mattering anymore. You know what I mean? So when we lose track of God, we can become like that. We can become corrupters. We can, in ourselves, even think we're Christians or behaving in a Christian way. I thought I was behaving Christian. I was telling people that evolution was wrong. The earth was only 6,000 years old as far as I was concerned. And that was somehow going to help people. If they could only realize the falseness of evolution, they'd come to Christ. You know, and you create a false dichotomy, too, between you know, if you can either believe in Jesus or evolution. And whereas I do understand that for some people that's a irreconcilable conflict, but for others it isn't. And also, you know, you can still believe the earth is flat and believe in Jesus, or believe the earth is round and believe in Jesus. And maybe that belief, you know, they don't have to be connected. And one can wane while the other grows stronger. You know, you can't serve two masters. That doesn't mean that people don't. They do serve two masters, but what Jesus is saying is their service sucks. You know what I mean? You can't serve two masters. You will love the one and hate the other. The point is, as you try to serve two masters, you will serve one and not the other. And at first, maybe you know how that's going to start. At first, you will start off trying to serve both, and eventually end up serving but one or maybe neither. The frustration of it. So they've forsaken him, they've provoked him to anger. It makes God angry. Now, I'm not a big... I tell you what, when I read a passage like God being provoked to anger, or a lot of other things, you will find, I point out, God is all-knowing. God is all-seeing. God is full of all knowledge. And he doesn't get angry the way human beings get angry. And you have to understand that every time God is characterized in a human way, and that while we have a shared nature with God, meaning that he has made us in his image, and there's something of human nature that is derived from divine, but it is not a divine nature. We have but a human nature, right? But it can become a divine nature through the power of the blood of Christ, through our faith in him, right? But God himself, the ultimate, is he can't be surprised. He can't be taken unawares. Same thing, Paul. But my point is, there is no like the idea, like his anger is not like or frustration or all those things we think about. It's much more like I said, an anthropomorphism. I didn't say it yet, but that's the word I was looking for. Anthropomorphism, meaning making something appear human that is not. Because God is not human, and he doesn't get angry like a man. When it talks about God being jealous, it's not jealous like the way men are jealous. It's different. But it's written because it's similar enough so that we could understand that something like human jealousy is going on, that something like human rage is engaged in here. Like, if it was a human, he'd be angry. If God was a human, you'd be looking at a really angry human because of this. If God was a human, you'd be looking at a very sad human, or a very vengeful, very angry, meaning that that's how we can understand and relate to God, as we are created in his image. Through the image of God in us, we are able to interpret and understand God's actions and his emotions. But the fact that he is all-knowing means that, and God's all-knowing, and all this is according to plan. The idea of him spontaneously getting angry doesn't make sense. I mean, just like him sort of being there like, I'm so mad at what Ahaz did. Like it happened in real time. As if from the beginning, it had not been part of God's determinate counsel and foreknowledge that all this would come into being. Now, from an outsider's perspective, from a non-believer, they're going to look at that and say, it sounds like people didn't used to understand God, but now you do, Paul, and so you make that assertion. And it's a fair thing to make as an accusation. But, I look at it from the very beginning. I mean, you look at Genesis. The Bible is filled with anthropomorphism. Like the very point where God is walking in the garden looking for Adam, and he's like, Adam, where are you? Or he says to Cain, Cain, where's your brother? When I ask the question, Cain is where's your brother? That you should think about that. Because he doesn't, obviously God knows. He even says so. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. He's not asking like he don't know where he is. He's all knowing. But he asks it in the narrative as part of, because that's how it's revealed. I don't know, the why is not always clear. Is it because it's for us to understand, to help us understand, to help us relate to God? He becomes more man. I mean, because you look at the idea of Jesus, he is God becoming a man, so that man can be reconciled to God, and also to be intercessor and to relate us to God and God to us. He serves that purpose, bridging the gap between humanity and the divine, and that's very critical. But I don't know, a specific understanding of how that all is laid out is we don't exactly have. But what I say is be careful of how you begin to think about God based on things prophets say, like the Lord is angry. Prophets saying the Lord is angry. The prophets say a lot of things symbolically. A lot of things, look at Revelation, the great whore, she's burned with fire. There's all this symbolic stuff going on. Just like the axe and the the axe and the os. The ass and the ox mentioned in the previous verse. The ass and the ox are animals, and they are used as an analogy to explain how God's people behave. And that is symbolic. That is the metaphor and symbology. That's how it works. This would be metaphor. Not a direct metaphor, but they're comparing them directly to asses. So it's a kind of a metaphor. Okay, they're gone. So they have provoked him to anger. They are gone away backwards. They go backwards, meaning they're not making progress forward. They're not even staying still. Like, their parents' sins. Like, I'm stuck in my mom and dad smoked weed, and I got a problem with weed. I'm in their sins. Or my mom and dad are alcoholics. I got a problem with alcoholics. I'm in their sins. But no. My mom and dad were alcoholics, and I'm an alcoholic, and I beat my children. That'd be a good one to take out of context. I'm an alcoholic, and I beat my children. Thanks. I just red flagged it for somebody. There we go. But, what I'm saying? Like, it's going further. They're going backward to greater iniquity. Because in the scripture, the idea of going forward is going forward with God in the commandments, in the covenant, to do the things right, to change and to alter ourselves. Because from the beginning, from the Genesis, the idea that the reason God was interacting with humans was for redemptive purposes. Not that they shouldn't go away backwards, but that they should come unto him. To come forward to God. Not backwards to the world or Satan. Not backwards and away and out of this holy place. I imagine backing out of the temple. But to move forward to God. I'm thinking the temple is like that idea, is like inward, forward. They're gone backward. Why should you be stricken anymore? Why will you revolt more and more? The whole head is sick and the whole heart faint. And what he does here is he begins this, again, an analogy of the nation of Israel as presented as a sick person, a body that is filled and racked with disease. And that is very much how sin is portrayed many times, as a disease. Obviously, they know it's not a disease, but it is like a disease in many ways, that it can be somewhat mystifying. Especially considering, man in his natural state, man without scientific knowledge, without this inherited, it's not the word inherited, but the accumulated knowledge. Humans' ability to accumulate knowledge, to put it into storage, and then to pass it on to another generation. Like, we are the beneficiaries of a lot of accumulated knowledge. I'm sitting here in front of a microphone that I couldn't invent. in front of a computer that I couldn't build except from parts that other people had already manufactured. There are all kinds of things that I'm benefiting from the past. So why should you be stricken anymore? While you will revolt more and more. So why should you continue to be stricken? Because it implies either consequence from the sin, because there is consequence. People's lives end up miserable, lonely, or whatever. Miserable lives, painful experiences. Because sin leads to some painful experiences. It's led me to some really painful experiences. Sin. And you're saying you will revolt more and more. That's predictive. Why should you be stricken in it? Isn't it enough? Like, you've been punished enough that you ought to take notice and be like, hey, you know what? I think something's wrong. I think God might be trying to get my attention. I've heard people say that many times. Things are going wrong, and they start saying, believers will say, I think God might be trying to get my attention. And that may very well be true. Sometimes we go along and we're like, oh, just living my sinful life. And then, I'm a Christian, of course. And we just sort of there were times with certain sins I had where they were just ongoing and I couldn't shake them. And I thought to myself, maybe God just doesn't care. Maybe God just doesn't care. Maybe because he's not helping me out. He's not helping me free myself from this sin. So maybe you just don't care. That's an unfortunate feeling. But it's something people sometimes feel. And so it leads to greater and greater revolts. And I'm sure there are other ways you can lead to more revolt, just because people tend to be stubborn. And there's not there's not a great deal of, let's stop doing this. It's not helping in the human condition. Once certain things become institutionalized, they almost never end, unfortunately. Once things become societal, it's hard to turn things around. Especially if it's something that's we've removed a restriction. It's easy to end prohibition, but try getting it started. It's easy to it's easy to end, it's easy to make drugs legal, but to keep them illegal and out of people's hands, hard. So he says, from the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it. The whole head is sick, the whole heart faint. The head and the heart, very critical. It's considered, the heart, even to this day, though, if you experience life as a human being and you have normal feelings, sometimes you feel heart issues, literally feel it in your chest. There's a psychological, somatic reaction to things in the body. So it's no wonder that the ancients often talked about the heart as the center of the person, of the being. And certainly, though it does not think, it is certainly the very center of your life, as far as your life is very much bound up in the activity of that heart pumping blood. And obviously, there are times when your mind can have sudden thoughts enter them, or fears that can, boom, impact your heart, adrenaline spikes, all that stuff. So the heart is a very important organ. They knew that. And that has not changed. The importance of the heart has never been diminished by our learning more about it. And the head, of course, also. But from the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified. Nothing's been done. There's no sterilization. It's just these dirty, filthy, oozing sores. Putrefying wounds and sores and bruises. And there's this picture of this body that is in total decay. That's what your nation looks like to me. It's decayed. Yuck. And it would not be at all inappropriate to compare them to us right now in America, because our nation is in a state of decline societally. It doesn't mean the end, but we are in things go up and down. They're rarely ever staying static. I've told people, it's like There's absolute evil, there's absolute good. Only God is totally good, and absolute evil, well, whatever. I don't know if there's only anyone who's absolutely evil, or if there's anyone who even gets that far. If you have absolute good and absolute evil, there's a lot of territory in between. You know? And most people are just a little bit good or a little bit bad. And well, if you take in with a measure of grace, of course, because obviously, from the perspective of God, there's no one good, because sinful, having sins, you're with sin, it's different than with a lot of things, because you go from sinless, because good is a totally different thing, I think, because like you can measure sort of good on a sliding scale. Sin, it's like one sin is not a lot, but it makes you a sinner instantly. Because you don't have to have 50 sins to be a sinner. You just need one. And the problem with eternal life is, if you never sin, you still aren't worthy of it. Like, even if you never sinned, it's not like you earned the right to live forever. This is still something that God gives on his grace and mercy, and none of us have lived a perfect life. All of us have sinned. And so none of us are worthy of God's glory. So the idea is Israel is presented. The nation had become corrupt. And we will read the details of that as we go through Isaiah, of their corruption. But the nation is portrayed as this body that is ill. It's falling apart. It's sick. It's got sores. It's putrefying. It hasn't been taken care of. There's nothing been done to fix it. And in our country, the things we do, it's like there's nothing being done to really fix any of the real problems we have as far as a society. I'm not talking about fiscal problems or like that. I mean like the moral issues which threaten the very fabric of us as a people. It threatens us to divide us into two warring camps. That kind of thing. Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire. Your land strangers devoured in your presence, and it is desolate, as overthrown by strangers. Yep, and then it goes into, the daughter of Zion is less than his cottage in a vineyard, another analogy. The small remnant, we would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah. We're probably going to get to that tomorrow. Well, we're going to get to it tomorrow. We're not going to go that much further now. We're going to wrap up. Here we have, let's see, why? From the sole of the foot, bruises, putrefying sores, not been clothed, neither bound up, mollified with ointment. And we read the next verse. I probably want to begin with verse 7 next time, because it starts with these details. Your country is desolate, your cities burn with fire, your land strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers. It's an interesting thing. I'm going to comment a little on this because we got a few minutes, but just the idea of your land being devoured by strangers. Obviously it makes people think of immigration and stranger people from other lands and that kind of thing. But if you think about it, when strangers are devouring your land, let's say coming in and just buying it, that's not good, because a lot of the real wealth of the nation is in the land, because a lot of things will lose value. Like gold can become totally worthless. Gold in a certain economy has no value. You know what I'm saying? There are different kinds of economies. And depending on the economy, different things become worth more or less. And some things become absolutely worthless. Like in a true disaster economy where everything's falling apart, like the whole society is almost apocalyptically coming to an end. The real value is in things like bullets and food and stuff like that, not in precious metals. Lead is the other precious metal. The only metal worth stockpiling is lead, as I always say. Lead. Don't worry about gold. Just make sure you have enough lead. And the gold, I don't know. People who crave gold, it's It's a sickness. So they have this analogy of the cities and all that burn with fire, strangers devouring it. When people are coming and buying up your land, it makes you think of like China up in Canada, in British Columbia. They're just buying things up there, and some people see it as sinister. I mean, it depends. I mean, obviously, it depends on the foreigners. I mean, what they're up to and what they're buying and why. But the thing is, when strangers buy up your land, suddenly you find yourself living in a country that you don't own. I mean, ask the Palestinians. Ask the Palestinians, because that's what happened to them. And, a lot of people want to blame the Jews, but the Jews came in, they bought the land from the people who owned it, which is usually not the people who were living on it. I mean, just be facts and straight. I'm not anti-Israel. I've had a lot of people try to get me to be. We give them so much money. I always say, well, what are we getting for? Are we getting nothing? I mean, some nations we give money and we get nothing except hate. It's possible we get something valuable from certain nations. I don't know. But in Israel, they bought the land. The Palestinians were living. There wasn't really Palestine. That was something the British came up with. But there were people living, small numbers of them, in the land of Israel. So Jerusalem, of course, always had been inhabited. There were lots of people there. Jews, Muslims, Christians. But the general land of Israel, there was a lot of it that was desert, not being used, not particularly productive. But there were tenants there, Bedouins and stuff and whatever else. There was some injustices done. But the injustice was, the owner of the land sold it. And then the Jews evicted them and took over the land. And which was in their right to buy the land, and it's because someone else owned it. They didn't have the protections we might have here. And it's not entirely a pretty business. And I'm not here to rip on them, but my point is, that's how strangers end up devouring your land. You're especially you consider this is gonna be weird here at the end, but we just devalued our currency. It hasn't really trickled down yet, but last year we printed up so much money, it's going to have an effect, right? And what that means, though, is that foreigners can come in, if their currency is strong, and they can buy our land with our money, for them, at dirt cheap prices. So our nation is up for sale. Anything you got to buy in American dollars is going to go cheap. Well, as our dollars, as we inflate the dollar, it's going to be more and more dollars for everything. I don't know. Our dollars become cheap. Well, that's the point. Is if you have 1 Swiss franc per dollar, but all of a sudden they print $3 more and it's $4 per franc. Now you see a guy who was looking at a $100,000 home now can look at a $400,000 home. That's the problem with the currency being inflated. Oh, whatever. Off topic. Anyways, we're going to continue at verse 7 tomorrow. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to being back again all week to continue in the book of Isaiah. And until then, have a very blessed day. It's my anniversary, and I will be celebrating that with my family.